The debt crisis in China's real estate industry has not only spawned a large number of unfinished buildings, or rotten tail buildings as they're called in China, but the crisis has also affected its upstream steel industry. People may have two general impressions of China's steel industry. First is its size. It's the world's largest, scale-wise. Second is its overcapacity. The latter is a headache for the world. As China floods the market with cheap steel, it has shut down steel mills in other countries and left workers unemployed. For nearly a decade, the US and Europe have been fighting the CCP over this issue. Due to the impact of the real estate industry, the latest data from China's National Bureau of Statistics shows that the operating profit ratio of 247 steel companies nationwide has dropped dramatically from 83.55% in March to 15.15% in late June, a plunge of nearly 70 percentage points. At least 6 steel companies have gone bankrupt and 28 have ceased production in 2022. The chairman of Hebei's largest privately owned steel company said in an internal meeting on June 17th, "No one wants to go out of business. Every steel enterprise will die unwillingly only when they have exhausted their savings from the previous years, when the banks have withdrawn their loans and never lent again, when the cash flow has been completely drained, and when the owners have pleaded everywhere and no one has responded." He's pessimistic that the situation facing the steel industry will last at least 5 years or so. He said, "At present, the steel industry has entered a loss situation as a whole, and it isn't clear when the loss will end or to what extent. It will take 30% of the steel enterprises to close down before the steel industry can enter a state of break-even and normal operation." This view is shared by the Chinese media, The Economic Observer. On June 25th, it reported that steel prices in mainland China have continued to fall rapidly since June 2022. Recently, it's gone to the extreme. The report reads, "Steel prices have fallen more than expected, steel mills and traders have lost money, and pessimism has gripped the industry." For example, on June 20th, the price of rebar futures plummeted, falling below 4,100 points and closed lower for 6 consecutive trading days, dropping to $603 per ton, setting a new low price over the past 7 months. The spot price of rebar also saw a drop of $14.8 per ton on the same day. On June 23rd, the gross profit per ton of steel calculated by the steel mill based on a 2-week raw material inventory fell to about $74. This is a continuation and expansion of the previous crisis in China's steel industry that has gripped the nation since 2020. 2 years ago, due to the strong impact of the COVID-19 epidemic, China's steel industry was plunged into a huge crisis, with 54 steel companies going bankrupt or shutting down within a year. 2021 saw at least 8 steel companies go bankrupt in China. In 2022, the new ones added to the list, which have publicly announced their bankruptcy liquidation, are at least the 6 steel companies as follows. According to the information on the Ali auction platform, an insolvent steel company in Fujian province will conduct a public auction on the online platform from July 29th to 30th to auction off the company's machinery and equipment, fixed assets and land use rights with a starting price of about $4.89 million. In the steel market, the price of raw materials is quite firm. China is the world's largest importer of iron ore, and its dependence on imported iron ore exceeds 80%. The price of steel is falling rapidly. This contrast has made Chinese steel companies generally lose money, including many listed companies. This has led to cash flow problems for the companies and forced them to reduce production. As a result, some steel mills have opted for an early maintenance period and entered a dormant period in the market. At least 28 steel mills in China have been forced to shut down production to reduce losses, and this wave of shutdowns has spread to several provinces in the southwest and north. The latest steel company to announce a shutdown is a group in Shandong province, which announced it would stop production starting July 19th. In addition, some employees of a steel company in the eastern coastal province of Jiangsu have also been put on leave since July 15th. Every day when I go to work, I pass a job recruitment site here. Do you see? I see people sleeping under the eaves every day. All of them come to look for work. Do you see them sleeping on the steps or lying on the square? They are all young guys looking for work, bringing with them bags and buckets of various sizes. So this year, if you have a job, you are the luckiest already. The chairman of Anyang Iron and Steel Group, China's well-known mega steel company, stressed at the company's second quarterly general meeting of staff that the current market situation is extremely severe and the entire industry is suffering large-scale losses which are likely to continue and expand. With the high temperature and rainy season coming, the low season is on its way. The situation is not optimistic, and production and operation are facing huge challenges. According to data from the National Bureau of Statistics of China, in the first half of 2022, crude steel output in 10 provinces and cities across the country fell by more than 10% year-over-year. Rebar production also fell sharply. The country's total production of steel bars fell by 14.1% compared with the same period last year. Shipments from Chinese steel traders also fell sharply in the second quarter of 2022. Although steel production is falling, inventories of steel companies are still building up due to the lack of demand. In mid-June, the steel inventory of key Chinese steel enterprises was 20.52 million tons, an increase of over 2 million tons since the end of May, and an increase of close to 5 million tons from the same period last year, a new high in recent years. This phenomena clearly shows that the steel industry in China, like the real estate industry, is in a huge bubble with shrinking demand and overcapacity. A head of a Chinese trading company told the Chinese media that he hadn't seen this phenomena for many years. That is, overproduction, declining demand, some traders dropping prices in panic, and the bottom of steel prices continuing to move down. His company's sales volume has dropped by about 20 to 30% compared to the same period last year. With steel prices still falling, many trading wholesalers can only lie flat, meaning do nothing. Another steel trading company owner said that the company's staff income has fallen sharply. Among the 30 salespeople, 6 left in June and 4 in July, and the remaining competent salespeople don't know whether they can hold up. The steel industry has long been the lifeblood of the Chinese economy. So, how did it get to where it is today? Since 1996, China's steel industry capacity has ranked first in the world, and it's become the biggest driver of global steel overcapacity. In 2020, China's crude steel output was 1.053 billion tons, accounting for 57% of global output. In 2021, it was 1.033 billion tons, a decrease of 3%. Before 2008, the asset turnover rate of China's steel industry continued to increase. In 2008, the international financial crisis occurred and the CCP's 4 trillion RMB investment plan was introduced, which prompted the rapid expansion of fixed asset investment. Most of these investments were converted into production equipment, that is, production capacity. The fiscal stimulus at the time resulted in a large amount of public infrastructure investment, and the real estate bubble was growing at an unprecedented rate, stimulating the rapid recovery and expansion of upstream industries such as steel, cement, and metals. In the second half of 2015, when the Chinese economy showed some signs of slowing down, the problem of overcapacity in the steel industry became apparent. In that year, China's domestic steel consumption fell by 5.4%, and the losses of its large and medium-sized steel enterprises already reached 50.5%. After that, the Chinese government tried to reduce production capacity. In a market economy, overcapacity can be solved by adjusting capacity quickly and by retiring players. However, China's steel industry is dominated by state-owned enterprises, especially involving many local state-owned enterprises. Despite the executive order from the central government, there are many ways to counteract the situation at the local level. Under the pressure of GDP, employment and taxation targets, local governments continue to subsidize overcapacity enterprises, limiting the effect of decapacity. Moreover, the decapacity of China's steel industry involves laying off as many as 5 to 6 million workers, which involves debt, worker resettlement, and social stability. To maintain the so-called stability, the central government hasn't been that determined. The CCP has thought of a way to absorb the excess capacity through the Belt and Road projects, but the amount of absorption is relatively small. The main strategy remains the same as before, with the continued dumping of steel and aluminum at low prices around the world, which has resulted in a flood of cheap products on the global market to the detriment of many national manufacturers. Former President Trump struck back in 2018 when he announced that the U.S. would impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. The Biden administration has continued this approach. U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai stated in November 2021 that the U.S. government would prevent Chinese steel imports from harming the U.S. steel industry and market. She said China's steel production has skyrocketed over the past 20 years. Today, China produces more than 1 billion metric tons of steel annually, accounting for nearly 60% of global steel production. China produces more steel in a single month than the US and most other countries in the world produce in a year. China's government continues to pour billions of dollars into targeted industries and continues to shape its economy to the will of the state, hurting the interests of workers here in the US and around the world. During the G7 summit in late June, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also hinted that the UK would likely continue to maintain high tariffs on imported steel. This policy is widely believed to be used to prevent the dumping of Chinese steel. The European Union began imposing restrictions on steel imports in 2018, which were extended after Britain's exit from the EU, with more tariffs imposed on steel above the quota to protect the domestic market. According to Hong Kong's South China Morning Post, China has faced 15 steel-related anti-dumping investigations from the EU and Australia, Thailand, the UK, the US, and other countries as of September 2020, compared to only 13 anti-dumping investigations in 2019. The CCP has always explained to its own people and the world that the benefits of socialist and communist systems are high efficiency and the ability to pool resources to do big things. But China's steel industry, like many other industries such as the textile industry, real estate, etc., that we reported on earlier, shows that this kind of communist-style group and thinking is actually inefficient and even dangerous in terms of operating an economy. For a certain period of time, it seems that the economy is booming, but it's based on comprehensive pollution of the environment, waste of natural resources, extremely cheap labor for the people, and has laid a series of bombs for future collapse. Insiders in China's steel industry also admit that the country's steel industry is big, but not strong. Special steel is mainly used in machinery, automobiles, military and chemical industries, home appliances, ships, transportation, railways and emerging industries, etc., and is often considered an important indicator of a country's ability to become a steel powerhouse. But over the years, China needs to import this type of steel from Europe, Japan, the US, and other countries and regions. Take the White Elephant project that the CCP government is proud of, for example. In the high-speed railway project, the bearing steel it needs depends on imports. At the same time, cheap steel makes this industry in China, although large, very fragile in terms of vitality. It's equivalent to a cost reduction of 400 yuan RMB per ton of steel. For a steel conglomerate with monthly output approaching 500,000 tons, we can save the cost of nearly 200 million yuan RMB. The chief analyst of the China Iron and Steel Association described to Chinese media that in the first half of 2021, the profits of China Iron and Steel Association members were 220 billion RMB, and Bloomberg estimated that the profits of the three major mines in the same period was 65.9 billion US dollars, or more than 400 billion RMB, far more profitable than the entire Chinese steel industry. China uses high-priced imported iron ore to produce crude steel products for foreign countries. The profits are taken away by foreign mines, but the emissions remain in China. The carbon emissions by China's steel industry account for about 15% of the country's total carbon emissions and more than 60% of the global steel carbon emissions. The CCP is not happy about it either. In February this year, 3 government departments jointly issued a document to encourage mergers and restructuring of leading steel companies. Currently, steel companies supported by the CCP already occupy 7 of the world's top 10 steel producers. Among them, China Baowu Iron and Steel Group Company Limited in 2020, after a series of mergers and acquisitions, surpassed ArcelorMittal, the global steel giant, to become the world's largest steel manufacturer. In 2021, this wholly state-owned steel company accounted for about 14.2% of China's total steel production. The economic winter hit the CCP before it even had a chance to gain control of global iron ore prices. The most deadly blow comes from the real estate sector. Against the backdrop of a rapid cooling of the real estate sector, as of July 23rd, homeowners of 315 unfinished or rotten-tail projects in China have initiated a movement to stop paying mortgages on them. I would rather be a defaulting homeowner than repay the mortgage. If I am not forced to this point, who would like to discredit their credit with the bank and even affect the next generation? Common people, 1 generation, 2 generations, or even 3 generations may end up waiting for a construction halt on their buildings that lasts forever, or even rotten-tail buildings. Despite knowing that the home they bought is beyond salvation, they still have to repay the mortgage to the bank every month. This is the absurd reality and logic we face. Rabbits will bite when they are desperate, and if a person is pushed to such a point, why would he care about being on the bad credit list? In China, construction projects have long been a huge pool of funds for CCP elites, local governments, banks, developers, etc. to grab funds. Now the chain of the input to the capital pool has suddenly broken, and it can be said that it is a harbinger of this economic collapse. According to industry data provided by BuyInfo, a Chinese commodity market information provider, the 3 main industries for downstream consumption of steel are construction, machinery, and automobiles. Among them, machinery accounts for 18%, and automobiles account for 17%. The amount of steel used in the construction industry is divided into 2 parts: real estate and infrastructure investment. Taken together, the construction industry uses nearly half of the steel, or about 49%. The director of Shanghai Steel Information told the Chinese media that sluggish real estate investment and the continuous decline in the area of new housing construction were the main reasons for the sluggish steel demand in the past 2 years. In the first 5 months of 2022, the total sales area of commercial properties and the area of new housing construction in China fell by 23.6% and 30.6% year-over-year respectively, and are still on the trend of contraction. Despite the Xi Jinping administration's call for a full-scale infrastructure push to rescue the economy, it is unlikely to fully compensate for the loss of demand from the real estate slump and the loss of exports. China's infrastructure investments in the first 5 months of the year increased by 6.7% year-over-year, but the percentage of effective construction starts remain low. And due to the repeated outbreaks and the restrictive measures of the zero-COVID policy, the construction start rate is low, and the logistics and transportation haven't been able to go smoothly so far. Downstream consumption of steel in China, with machinery accounting for 18% and automobiles 17%, is also not very promising. In the first 5 months of this year, the output of major products in China's machinery industry declined overall, and only 8 of the 30 representative products in the key statistics increased year-over-year. In the first 5 months of this year, the output of excavators fell by 30.5% year-on-year, of which the decline in April was as high as 58.9%. Of course, as necessary mechanical equipment for construction projects, the condition of excavators also verifies the low effective operating rate of China's infrastructure projects. The cumulative production and sales of automobiles in China also fell in the first 5 months of 2022 by 9.6% and 12.2% respectively. The sudden break in the chain of China's economy, the unexpected kind of feeling, may be similar to what this man saw when he opened the door of his apartment. When opening the door, this man who lives on the 5th floor found the entire stairwell had disappeared. There is no stairwell. Friends, can you give me a tip on how to get downstairs? How can I get to work? The man later went up and down via a wobbly ladder at the back of the building. Look, it's a little shaky and it's scary. Look, I'm behind someone's window. This family doesn't dare to live here and have moved away. I'm still living on the 5th floor. I've climbed up this spiral staircase. Now I'm going to go over this window. There's a window here, and I have to climb in from here. The resident still has the spiral staircase as his plan B, but for the Chinese steel entrepreneurs, they seem to have lost all hope. Why? The chairman of the largest private steel enterprise in Hebei province mentioned before and offered the following reasons. 1. The existing technological means have allowed the Chinese steel industry to play out its capacity thoroughly, and the production has been released to a large extent, making it more difficult to compete. Second, the infrastructure with utility value such as real estate, infrastructure, and public works in China has been largely completed. 3. The impact of the COVID-19 epidemic has resulted in the closure of many downstream enterprises of steel, and residents are left with no money in their hands, just enough to maintain their basic living, unable to afford to buy houses, cars, and home appliances. 4. It's becoming difficult to start up any national capital projects and businesses have no funds. 5. Local government's debt risk has become significant and they can no longer raise large amounts of debt.